In a moment that captivated the world, Hollywood icon Morgan Freeman was handed a heartfelt letter from Burkina Faso's president, Ibrahim Traoré, on live television, sparking an emotional journey of discovery. As Freeman's voice trembled and tears fell, the letter unveiled a profound connection to his long-lost cousin, Kosi, whose legacy of hope and sacrifice, in a remote African village, transformed lives. This stirring exchange, filled with raw emotion and unexpected revelations, not only moved millions to tears, but also inspired a global movement of compassion, proving that one voice can echo across continents to heal and unite. It was supposed to be a calm Thursday morning in Los Angeles. Morgan Freeman sat comfortably on the set of a morning talk show. The host, Olivia Sanders, smiled brightly and asked him about his latest film. The audience clapped gently, sipping coffee and soaking in the familiar warmth of his voice. Then, out of nowhere, Olivia paused. "We have something special for you today," she said, reaching under her seat. She handed Morgan a plain brown envelope, no markings, just one line, from President Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso. The moment turned quiet. Even the cameras seemed to freeze. Morgan held the envelope like it was sacred, his hands trembling ever so slightly. The host didn't speak again. The audience leaned in, breath held. He slowly opened the flap. Inside was a single handwritten letter. As his eyes scanned the first few lines, something changed in his expression. His smile faded, his lips parted slightly, but no words came out, and then his voice cracked. The room was silent. The world was about to witness something no one had ever seen. Morgan's fingers tightened around the paper. His eyes, normally calm and powerful, began to water. For a man who had lived decades on camera, this moment was different. He cleared his throat and began to read softly, "To the voice that carried our stories when we were forgotten, to the man who brought dignity to our pain with every word spoken." The room fell deeper into silence. The camera zoomed gently on his face. His hands shook. "You didn't just act, you healed. You didn't just narrate, you resurrected our dignity." His voice cracked again. A single tear rolled down his cheek. Olivia, the host, was visibly moved but remained silent, giving him space. "I am writing from a country many have overlooked, but not you. In your voice we heard ourselves. In your roles we saw our fathers, our hopes." Morgan stopped. He couldn't read further. He dropped the letter onto his lap and covered his face with both hands. The man who narrated the world's pain was now living his own moment of raw truth, and it was all because of a letter from a president no one expected. For several seconds no one said a word. Then one soft sob came from the audience. A woman in the front row had tears running down her face. Another man beside her held his chest, visibly moved. Morgan tried to gather himself, wiping his face gently with a handkerchief. I wasn't ready for this," he whispered, voice trembling. This is different." He looked up at Olivia, eyes still wet. "I've received awards, standing ovations, honorary degrees, but no letter, no gesture has ever done this to me." The host reached for his hand, not to comfort a guest, but to connect with a human soul unraveling in real time. Olivia turned to the camera and said softly, "You just witnessed something real, something rare. A message from one leader to another, across oceans, across time." Behind the scenes, producers were frozen. No one dared cut to commercial. Online, the clip was already going viral. People were reposting it with one simple caption: "Morgan Freeman cries on live TV and we cried with him." But what was in the rest of the letter? That mystery was only just beginning. That night, Morgan Freeman didn't sleep. The letter stayed on his nightstand, open beside a dim lamp. He read it over and over, each time slower than before. There was a paragraph he hadn't read on air, too personal, too intense. "I grew up in a small village in northern Burkina Faso," the letter read. "We had no running water, no electricity, but once a month, a truck would come with a generator and a screen and we watched movies." Morgan paused, hand over his chest. "The first voice I ever heard in English was yours. I didn't understand the words, but I felt them." Tears welled up again. The next morning, Morgan called the show's producers. "I want to finish reading the letter on air," he said. Back at the studio, the producers hesitated. It wasn't scheduled, it wasn't part of the promo tour, but after seeing the reaction online, millions of views overnight, they said yes. Morgan would return to finish what began, but neither he nor the world was ready for what came next. The studio was packed, cameras ready, no music, no intro, just silence. Morgan Freeman walked onto the stage with the letter in hand, no script, no teleprompter. Olivia greeted him, but he just nodded, looked at the audience, and began. "This letter is not just for me, it's for all of us," he said. He read the next part aloud. "When I became a soldier, I carried your words in my heart. Hope is a thing with feathers," you once quoted. I remembered that every night in the forest. The room went quiet again. "Mr. Freeman, your voice gave me courage. I now lead a country that still fights for its breath, but I've never forgotten that voice. That voice gave me back my name." At that line, Olivia gasped softly. Then Morgan paused, looking up slowly, his eyes heavy. How does a man respond to something like this? People at home were crying. Comments flooded social media. "This is not a letter, this is a mirror to the soul." But the letter wasn't done yet, and the most emotional part hadn't even been revealed. Just as Morgan was folding the letter, a small photo slipped out and fluttered to the floor. He picked it up slowly. It was a black and white image. A little boy, barefoot, standing in front of a torn sheet hung between two sticks, a makeshift movie screen behind him. Other children sat on logs, staring at the image of Nelson Mandela being portrayed on the screen. Morgan's voice caught. "That's me," he whispered. "That's from Invictus." Olivia leaned in. "You were their hero." Morgan flipped the photo over. In careful handwriting it read, "This is the night I decided I would one day help my people, and your voice, gave me that dream." The studio fell completely silent. Even the camera crew wiped their eyes. Then Morgan turned to the live camera. "President Traoré, if you are watching, please know this. Your letter changed me. It reminded me why I ever stepped in front of a camera." Backstage, producers were getting calls from major networks. People were not just watching, they were feeling, and millions around the world were waiting to hear what came next. While the letter was making headlines across the world, a quiet but urgent request was sent from Ouagadougou to Los Angeles. President Traoré wanted to meet Morgan Freeman privately. No cameras, no press, just a meeting between two men. One who spoke through film and the other who lived its message. At first, Morgan was unsure. His schedule was packed, his heart still shaken, but something about the letter wouldn't let him rest. 3 days after the broadcast, Morgan boarded a plane, destination, Burkina Faso. On board, he stared out the window, clutching the folded letter. He whispered to himself, "I need to look this man in the eye." As the plane crossed the Atlantic, social media exploded with hashtags like #TheLetterThatBrokeFreeman and #Traoré&Morgan. But none of them knew this journey was about to uncover something far deeper, something buried in Morgan's own past, something he never told the world, and it all connected back to a dusty village, a projector screen, and a boy with a dream. The sun was just rising when the jet touched down in Burkina Faso. Morgan was greeted with little fanfare, just a single government car and a translator named Awa. On the drive, Awa spoke softly. "The president, he doesn't show this side to many, but your letter, it meant everything to him." Morgan looked at her. "Why me?" She smiled. "Because you gave him hope when hope was hard to find." They drove through villages waking to life. Women fetching water, children walking barefoot to school, men fixing broken bicycles. Everything was so real. When they arrived at the presidential compound, Ibrahim Traoré was already waiting. He wore no suit, no medals, just a plain shirt and calm eyes. Morgan stepped out of the car slowly. The two men looked at each other, no words, just silence, then a quiet mutual nod. Traoré stepped forward, holding a faded photo. "Do you remember this boy?" Morgan took it. It was the same black and white photo, but now clearer. The boy's eyes, they were his own when he was young. "Wait, this child looks like my cousin," Morgan whispered. Ibrahim placed a hand on his shoulder. "He wasn't just watching you, he was waiting for you." Inside the compound, the president led Morgan to a quiet garden, no bodyguards, no aides. There, under a wide tree, Ibrahim began to speak, not as a politician but as a boy who remembered. After my father died, I lost everything, he said. But I found a new father through a voice that told stories that gave broken people dignity. Morgan sat in silence, his hands shaking slightly. Then Traoré leaned in. There's something I never told the world. I had a brother. His name was Kosi. He looked exactly like you. Morgan's breath caught. I had a cousin named Kosi. We lost him. No one ever found out where he went. Traoré reached into his folder, pulled out a worn paper. It was a photo of Kosi standing beside a younger Ibrahim, both smiling. Morgan froze. We shared stories about you every night until the day he disappeared. Suddenly, it was no longer just about the letter. It was about family, history, pain. The past wasn't just meeting the present. It was calling out for healing, and Morgan knew there was more to this journey than he ever imagined. Morgan walked slowly beside President Traoré through a quiet village outside the capital. Children waved, unaware of the weight these two men were carrying. Traoré stopped near a faded wall and pointed. Scratched faintly into the brick was a name, Kosi Freeman. Morgan froze. This was his name after he left America? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Traoré nodded. He said he wanted to keep your family name to honor you. Morgan knelt, brushing the wall gently with his fingertips. The name looked like it had been there for decades. He always said he wanted to become like you, but he couldn't go back. Why? Morgan asked, his throat dry. Traoré looked away. There was something he felt ashamed of, something he never told me, he said. The Freeman name deserved more than what he had become. Morgan's eyes filled with tears. He was just a boy. The air grew heavy. This wasn't just a letter anymore. It was a return to something long buried, grief, guilt, and a chance for healing. But the most painful truth was yet to come. President Traoré led Morgan to an old building, a quiet one-room house. This was Kosi's room, he said gently. We kept it just the way he left it. Morgan stepped inside. Dust hung in the light beams coming through the cracked window. On a small wooden shelf sat old Vitis tapes, books in English, and a single torn photo of Morgan smiling on the set of Lean on Me. Next to it was a journal. Morgan opened it, and his hands trembled as he read the first page. To my cousin Morgan, whom I love more than he'll ever know. I didn't run away. I was taken. But I stayed because here I was needed. Tears slid down Morgan's face. Kosi had been kidnapped from America as a teenager, and somehow, after escaping, he never returned. He taught me English, Traoré said softly. He taught many of us and helped build this village's school. He saved lives. Morgan sank onto the edge of the bed, speechless. He had mourned Kosi, grieved him as lost, but now he was learning he had been a hero. Morgan sat outside under the stars that night, holding Kosi's journal to his chest. President Traoré joined him, holding a second letter. This one, he said quietly, was meant for you. Kosi wrote it, but he never mailed it. He gave it to me before he passed. Morgan's breath caught. He opened the fragile envelope with care. Inside was a handwritten letter, aged but clean. Dear Morgan, I still hear your voice in my dreams. When things got hard, I thought about your roles, your power, your strength. I didn't come back because I was scared you'd forgotten me, but I never forgot you. Morgan closed his eyes. You gave me the courage to stay and help. I may have disappeared from your world, but you never disappeared from mine. I hope one day you'll come here and see what your voice helped build. With love, your little brother, Kosi. Morgan broke. He wept, not with shame, but with gratitude, pain, and love tangled all at once. For the first time, the silence he'd carried for years had been broken, and the journey was not yet over. Morgan and Traoré sat in the courtyard under a dim lantern, the letter from Kosi still on Morgan's lap, as if his cousin had just spoken. Traoré said gently, Kosi never stopped helping even after he fell ill. Morgan looked up sharply. He was sick. Traoré nodded. Malaria. He refused to leave the village. He said his story had to end where it started, with the people. Morgan held back tears. He died here? Traoré handed him another item, a faded photograph. Kosi, smiling weakly, surrounded by children holding books. He taught them to read using your movie scripts, Traoré said with a smile. Shawshank Redemption, Invictus, they knew every line. Morgan's heart clenched. He had always believed fame was his greatest legacy. Now he saw otherwise. It wasn't the roles he played on screen, but the hope his voice gave to someone the world had forgotten. And in that hope, Kosi found his purpose, and now maybe Morgan had found his too. But Traoré had one more surprise, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The next morning, Morgan was taken deep into a rural community. Children followed the car, waving and smiling. The energy was contagious. They stopped near a dusty path. Ahead stood a small school building, freshly painted. Above the entrance, a hand-carved sign read, Kosi Freeman Community School for Hope. Morgan's hands flew to his mouth. Traoré stepped beside him and said softly, "This school exists because of him and because of you." Morgan stepped inside. Walls were covered in student drawings, a classroom filled with laughter and voices reading in English. A teacher greeted him and handed him a notebook. Inside were messages from students. "Dear Morgan Freeman, thank you for making my teacher dream big. Your voice helped us believe. Kosi said you were a king. We think you are too." Morgan sat down on one of the small benches, overwhelmed. He never expected that his legacy would live here in Burkina Faso, in this small school built from sacrifice, brotherhood, and a love that stretched across continents. He looked at Traoré and whispered, "You've done more than just lead, Mr. President. You've healed a part of me I never thought could be healed." Before Morgan's flight home, Traoré invited him to a small evening gathering with the villagers. There were no cameras, no press, just people. An old man played soft music on a kora, and children performed a skit based on Morgan's film The Bucket List. Everyone laughed, even Morgan. At the end, Traoré stood and held a wooden box carved with West African patterns. He opened it and handed Morgan a medal. "This is not from the government," he said. "This is from the people, for the man who gave us a voice before we had one." Morgan took it, speechless. In that moment, he wasn't an actor, he wasn't a celebrity. He was just a man who unknowingly touched a world he never saw. As the stars shone above them, Morgan whispered a prayer under his breath. For Kosi, for the children, for Traoré. "Thank you," he said, voice trembling. Traoré smiled. "No, thank you." And just like that, a wound that had been open for decades finally closed. But the world wasn't done with this story, because when Morgan got back home, he carried with him something that would change everything. A final message for the world. 3 days after returning to the U.S., Morgan Freeman appeared on 60 Minutes for what was supposed to be a brief segment about his trip to Africa. But when the cameras rolled, the unexpected happened again. Morgan placed the letter from Ibrahim Traoré on the table. "This," he said, voice cracking, "this is the most powerful letter I've ever read in my life." He paused, then with trembling hands he began reading a part not shared before. "Dear Morgan, you have unknowingly mentored millions in Africa. Your voice reached my people before any government aid ever asset did. When we had no electricity, your words still played through old radios powered by hope." Morgan stopped. His voice broke. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, "He called me a light, but he doesn't know he became mine." The studio fell silent. No cards, no edits, just raw emotion. Within hours, that moment exploded online. Millions watched it, millions cried, but most importantly, millions now knew the name Ibrahim Traoré and why one letter could change everything. The days that followed were surreal. Major news outlets picked up the story. #FreemanAntraor trended globally. Schools began requesting copies of the letter. Oprah, moved by the broadcast, called it a masterclass in humanity. Emails flooded Morgan's inbox from teachers in South Africa, youth leaders in Brazil, even a prison chaplain in the U.S. Each one echoed the same truth. This letter didn't just speak to Morgan Freeman, it spoke to all of us. Donations poured in to support the Kosi Freeman School in Burkina Faso. In just 48 hours, it raised enough to build 3 more schools across the region. And then came a surprise. Ibrahim Traoré released a short video. No suit, no flags, just him standing beside schoolchildren under the setting sun. This is not a story about one man. It's about all of us, about choosing compassion even when no one is watching. Let's build more light together. His calm words echoed around the world. He didn't ask for praise, but the world gave it anyway, not as a politician but as a humble servant of the people. 1 week after the letter was first read, Morgan Freeman returned to his quiet home in Mississippi. He placed the letter inside a glass frame above his writing desk. But he didn't stop there. He announced a new foundation, the COSI Project, Stories That Heal. Its mission, to fund education and storytelling initiatives in underserved African communities. The first partner? The Office of the President of Burkina Faso. And in his first livestream event for the project, Morgan looked directly into the camera and said, "I used to think my greatest legacy was on film. But I was wrong. It was in a letter from a man who saw the world not as it is, but as it could be." Then he smiled softly, and it all began with a boy named Kosi and a leader named Ibrahim Traoré. The screen faded to black with one final image, a candle being passed from one child to another across the globe.